Hello guys and welcome back to the channel. Hope you're having a lovely day and enjoying this weather. I'm not going to moan about the temperature. So look at these two little beauties. We've got the V8 here that's all cleaned thoroughly. Isaac's been painting that. That looks fantastic. Cylinder heads are down there all painted. So that looks absolutely lovely. And we've got the 4.2 Jag. So that is all thoroughly cleaned. I had to give Isaac a little lesson today, as in thoroughly cleaning the threads out, because down here, it's a bit like when I long stood the Cosworths. On these Jags, down here, except for the N4, you see it bolts down. You've got the studs that bolt down into the bottom of the water jacket, just the same as the Cozzies, really. So you've got to make sure that that is thoroughly clean. And to do so, you've got to take all the core plugs out. But as you can see here, we've primed it, give it a nice coat of black, and that is looking lovely. The head's all done, all the bits are here. So these two here now, we can crack on with. We've got the crankshaft we've just unboxed down there for the V8. That's all been balanced. I know it's on the floor, guys, but that's going to be thoroughly cleaned in the morning. We've just sort of put it down here while we get it out of the box. But yeah, this thing here is ready to assemble. Paul has started to put together the 1500 pre-cross flow. We've got the clutch down here. That was all done. And Isaac's continued to balance that. But as you can see around here, it's like a bit of a colander. That was really far out of balance. So that's why that there, guys, is why it's so important to balance these things. But yeah, that's all done. He's got the pistons and rods and the crank in. So yeah, work in progress, but we are getting there, guys. Over here, we've got the big end bolts here for this TFSI, and the customer wanted us to put the pistons down the holes, so that's what we've done. We had to order the new bolts from Volkswagen. They turned up today and we've torqued that all up. He can have that back in the morning. This is the MGB, the 1800. So I've bored, this is the one I bored to 60 that I showed you in the last video. Faced it, this one's all ready to go. John is just having to grind the mains, I believe. Although they all measure okay, the big ends measure okay and are going to polish up fine. But on the mains, there's some, it looks like watermarks there from obviously where it's been just sitting. So we're just going to grind that crank and then we can balance all the crank assembly and get that thing on its way. But as I say, the pistons are not going to be here for a couple of weeks for that anyway. So right, guys, thumbnail and title time. I'm not sure whether I mentioned this in a previous video. I think that I have. So just start from the beginning briefly. Had a customer got back to me via email with a Golf GTI Mark II engine that we did about 2.5 years ago. It was invoiced. He got back to us not that long after he received the engine and said that he got all pressure issue on low idle. The engine wasn't reconditioned, it was rebuilt, which, as you all may know, we don't get involved with anymore. We only do it properly. So to sort of cut costs, he wanted to deglaze the bores. We polished the crankshaft. What he was doing was putting a 2-litre bottom end with an 1800 head, which obviously the 1800 was the standard engine. So we did all that. The bill was about 1500 quid plus the VAT, new bearings and what have you. He didn't have any oil pressure issues prior to the engine build. It was just a refresh because he was restoring the car. So we did this. Next thing, he had low oil pressure on idle. So we said, look, bring the car back in and we'll have a look at it. So we brought it in, we put our gauge on it, and yes, it was slightly low, but we said, look, go away, try a genuine filter, because at the time I think he had like an MAN filter on or something like that. We said, try a different sender to your gauge and see if that, because his gauge was reading a bit lower than ours. And it may be that the sender was a bit sensitive or something like that. So go away. We said, go. Obviously, you've got running in oil in it, so run it in, put your proper oil in, and see how you get on, basically. We never heard any more from him. I think it was about 2 months ago he got in touch with us. So bear in mind now, we're just under 2.5 years from doing the engine. Gets in touch saying he's still got the same issue. He said, he rang me up and he said, a garage has got it and we're sort of thinking about putting another oil pump in it. What's your feelings? We don't want to go disturbing your engine build. And I said, with all due respect, it's out of warranty. So you do exactly what you want to do. You know, really, he's a local chap, he's a nice bloke. We've done 2 engines for him. He brought us a V8, which we did, and he's had no issues with. So we don't like going upsetting people, so we don't just like to say it's out of warranty, jog on. We said, look, if that's what you want to do, try another pump. At least then, you know, we've eliminated that. So he did that, got back to me via email saying still the same. So I suggested he tries another filter. I suggested he tried another filter and an oil change, you know, see where you get on, but he still thinks he's getting that problem. So he came in and paid me a visit at the beginning of this week. So it was a very difficult one, and the reason I'm sort of putting this in a video is to really to get your advice on what you think, and I think I know what you're going to say, but it's a difficult one because, as I say, he's a local chap, but not that we sort of are any different with people that send engines in from away, but you know what it's like. We're quite well known around here. It's word of mouth, and it only takes a few negative comments to destroy your reputation. So he's come in. He said, you know, I haven't touched the car. I've done about 2,000 miles since I've had it, and I've done, in the last 2 years, he's done about 500 miles. He said, but the car's been stored in a garage. And I said, well, look, what I'm thinking is, at this stage, I said, yes, if you get the engine back to me as it was when you picked it up, so a bare basic engine, I mean, they're not very complicated. I said, first thing I'll do is I'll take the sump off, I'll have a look in the crank and measure the crank up and see what we got there. I said, because if you didn't have any problems before, I said, bear in mind, all we've done internally is polish that crank. We haven't bored it, we haven't ground the crank, we haven't really done anything that can upset the oil pressure. I said, the only thing would be if the bearings were not as they should be. I said, so I'd be wanting to measure all that first. I said, but the only thing you need to accept at this stage is that if we do that, which is not going to be anytime soon because of how busy we are, I said, you're going to have to do the work on getting the engine out and all this. I said, but once we get the engine in bits, no matter what we find, we are going to be putting the engine back as an engine recondition. And he said, well, what does that mean? I said, well, it means we're not going to be putting it back, even if it all measures up fine, as we did then, because as of about the beginning of last year, we only do engine reconditioning. So it means it will be bored, the crank will be ground, head will be gone through again, all new gaskets, etc. And you're going to be looking at about £3,000 plus the VAT. So it's one of those guys, as I say, I just wanted to sort of know what you think and what you would say, what you would do in this circumstance. And yeah, do you think that we should sort of go about stripping it for, you know, on the house, or do you think that it's fully chargeable, or do you think the guy is out of order for coming back to us, or do you think that we're out of order for not sort of going that far at the beginning? I'll leave it up to you guys. Let me know what you think in the comments. I'd be really interested to hear that. I've just been to pick up the Golf and take it over to Tim at Clover Cars from Volkswagen. I've got the bill down here. Volkswagen, absolutely good as gold. So this is Marshall's in Barnstable. They only charged us an hour labour. Bearing in mind, I reckon they spent way more than that on it. But as I say, all the electrical and sensor issues, non-existent. So what I've done is Tim ordered the valve for that new filter housing, and it turns out that the valve they sent isn't the one that we thought it was meant to be. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take, this is the old filter housing, and this in here, if you see that, what looks like a core plug in the middle of there, that is the valve that I'm telling you about. So I'm going to go over now, get this out. I'm going to give this a thorough clean because there's actually nothing wrong with this. And we're going to Tim's going to take the new one off, and we're going to compare them, because TPS is saying that the part number on this filter housing that was on it originally isn't meant to be on that car, but we all know what it's like. You get the registration and they all go off the reg, but the engine could be on a crossover day. It's a nightmare. When we sort of are ordering gaskets, we have the same thing. Gaskets will turn up, they're wrong, but apart from the system reckons that they're meant to be right. So yeah, we're just going to clean this up, and then Tim will get the other one off, and we'll compare them both. I'm just on my way back over to Clover Cars. As you can see, we've thoroughly cleaned the old housing, and Tim has got 2 new gaskets coming just in case, but we may have to reuse this. But this here is that little valve that I showed that we were on about. So all pending on what the one they put on there looks like compared to this. Obviously Matt checked it before he put it on, but you know what it's like. Sometimes a second pair of eyes or double checking maybe the results. So that is the little mystery valve. So we'll see what he says. Oh, look out, Isaac's got the saw out. What you doing, mate?
Just cutting the dowels off this flywheel so that we can face it. Tried getting them out, but they're just very tight.
So you've got to drill and tap them.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes you can, if you can get behind here, you can drill a small hole and punch them out from the back, but other times you can't and they ain't coming out. So he's had to hack them off, and then we'll just drill it and tap and probably slide hammer them out.
Best way.
Bit warm for it though, mate, isn't it?
Yeah, not really the best day to be like sawing for ages, but
never mind.
Yeah.
Thoroughly cleaned the V8 crank now. I blew this through. You'd be pleased to know we've got it off the floor before we get inundated with comments on putting engine parts on the floor. But as you can see, we've got all the new bits and what have you here now. So yeah, so we blew this through. We blew the block through. Block is thoroughly cleaned, I'm confident now. So we're just going to get the crank in, and then John is going to put the pistons on the rods, because these are not the circlip type. So you've got to heat the small end up and quickly sort of put the pin through at the right distance. But first of all, I'll get this crank in with the new bearings, and I'll show you it with the crank in and see how well it turns. So you can see we've got the centre cap on at the minute, centre main. All the bottom bearings are in. You obviously got to check, I know this is simple stuff, but you've obviously got to check that the right bearings are in the right side. So you've got a block side, which are, I'll show you the old ones. They're the ones with the groove and the hole in. Obviously the hole matches up with the oil feed. And then you've got a plain bearing which goes in the cap, and this is the plain bearing. So if you get them mixed up, you obviously got no hole to feed from the oil gallery, and you'll end up seizing the crank, spinning the main and wrecking the block and the crank and the engine. So that is extremely important. So what I normally do, oil the bearings. As I've said to you before, you've got to make sure that obviously all the oil galleries in the block are blown out and clean and bone dry before you put the bearing in. And also on the back of the bearing shell, make sure that is bone dry as well. You do not want to oil that, because what that's going to do is close up your clearance, and it's going to pinch the crank. So once you've done that, you've got all the bearings in, oil them up. So I always put 2 or 3 drips of oil in the base, and then just run it round with my finger, plonk the crank in. Then what I do, obviously you've got a thrust bearing in the centre here. On this one you've got 2 built-in thrusts on the cap side and the block side. A lot of the time you've got the same bearing in the middle as you on the thrust one as you has on the others, but you've got separate thrust washers. But on this it's all built in, so it's sort of, the thrusts are built into the cut, so you can't really go wrong. So once that's located, and then I put the centre cap on, and then I check the end float, make sure you've got the correct end float, because you're going to have a clearance here that's going to give you end float. You don't want that too tight, and you don't want it too loose that you've got too much end float. So we've got that right. Then we put the M1 on. So the end cap, you can see this one is running a conventional normal rubber seal on the end. So what we do with that, you make sure that's bone dry on the outside. Again, same as the housing. On the inside, we normally grease the lip of this seal. I put that on with the crank and make sure it's in the correct position without the cap on. Then with the cap on these V8s, as you can see here, we've got rubber seals on either side. Now, these can be a bit of an arse. Because it's such a close fit to the block on the cap, you put those seals in, they're like a cross. You can see the side of the seal here. You put them in, and then we have to trim them so there's next to nothing protruding. So basically what you want it is, you want it We always put a bit of silicone on anyway, but you want it a nice tap down fit. So what we do is we tap it down slightly. You don't want it protruding too much that the rubber's going to peel out, and you don't want it in too far that it's not going to do anything. So what we do is we tap the cap down slightly, just catch the threads on the bolts so we know that the cap is going down in line. Then we just tap it down, and at the same time wind the bolts down and just get it so it seats nicely. And then we nip that up and make sure it's all seated. Then we can trim the tops, and we know that's absolutely cock on then. And then obviously once I do every cap, I just make sure the crank turns. A lot of the time it doesn't. Some blocks are a bit funny. Before you've actually torqued it down, even when you do, say, the first 2 stages, if it's a 3-stage torque, you do the 2 stages and the crank will be locked solid. You think, bloody hell, what's going on here? And it's not until you do the final torque stage that it starts turning perfect. But this one you can see is fine, so we're just going to put the other caps on and get it torqued up. Well, thanks ever so much for watching, guys. Remember, hit that notification bell, subscribe, like, and we'll see you next week. Have a great weekend, enjoy the weather, make the most of it, but don't boil. See you later.